Hello, dear friends in Christ at Salem Lutheran Church, and some of you may know where I am at in the church at Salem here. Take a guess. Some of you will find this very familiar. Some of you probably will say, I have no idea where he's at. Well, I am back in the sacristy of the church, primarily because we are entering into these 5 weeks of John and talking about the bread of life. And so one of the allusions is to the communion setting. Even though John does not say that directly, a lot of the words and a lot of inferences are toward Holy Communion. Nonetheless, you'll see that our communionware behind me, you'll see the wafers up there in the back that way. And I'm going to shut these doors because they are getting to be a little distracting for you, so you might not listen to me instead of looking at all the good things behind me. This week, we're going to be talking about the question that I hope you will send some answers to, and that is reference to, and we'll read this a little bit later, the disciples were afraid that they didn't think there was going to be enough to feed the 5,000. And I'd like you to tell me about the times that you've either given your time or your money to feeding ministries. It could be any variety of ministries, but maybe you got a special instance or special thing that occurred while you were serving. I'd like to hear that. I'd love to share that in our sermon as we enter into this week, and hope that you'll be courageous enough to do so. Hey, I have a few announcements before I actually read the text for Sunday. Virtual Vacation Bible School continues. Hope that you are online looking at that. And if you have kids, grandkids, it's too late to sign up, but nonetheless, we have them online and anybody can access them. The garage sale is accepting donations. There's a few that are not acceptable, but that list can be found on the email blast, and hope that you will join us for that great event. The Magome Water Project, as I mentioned on my announcements on Sunday, one of the things about spending some time in Africa is the lack of clean water. Oftentimes, the women of the village, it was never the men, but the women of the village would carry buckets on top of their heads, and they could walk anywhere from 2 to 5 kilometers, sometimes even more. And basically what they were doing is bringing back river water, pond water, and they would have to boil that water. So it was not just simply getting the water, obtaining the water, but they had to boil it also because it's full of all kinds of bacteria that would make them sick. And oftentimes, even after that, they still would get sick. That's one of the biggest issues in Africa. And we have an opportunity to help our partners in Magome with clean water. They have done some investigation, and we can put in a well there, and this is a possibility that will make life so much better for our folks in Magome. So if you're interested in helping in that project, there are envelopes that you can pick up and put a check in, or there are many ways that you can give to that project if that is something that would be interesting to you. So it's a big deal, I know, for the folks in Africa, and very much appreciated. We are looking at some things that are going to be coming up, like National Night Out, first Tuesday in August. Look for information on that. We are going to have some things like ice cream sundaes, etc. And we've called for the fire truck. So if you have kids love the fire truck thing. The fire truck will be here sometime that evening. We're not exactly what time, so you might just have to join us for a little while, play some games, spend some time together. It'll be a good evening out. On something similar to that, God's Work, Our Hands, that's classically on the Rally Day, September 12th, I believe. And we are planning on doing some work for that as well. Look for that upcoming information. Streaming, we are updating cameras. Hopefully you'll find some improvements in our system soon as we get those together. Our mission exploration team is meeting today as I'm even videotaping this, and working on the mission site profile. And so hopefully that will be pretty close to completion, and we'll be able to take the next step of forming a call committee and searching for a new pastor. We're looking at a new thing, the nurturing board, about doing something for our children on Sunday morning during the fellowship time, during that coffee time. So look for information coming about that. We're going to try to generate some interest for our young families, and perhaps we would like to invite others as well. Kirk, our custodian, as many of you know, is facing some serious challenges. He goes in for a serious surgery tomorrow on Wednesday, so he appreciates all the prayers and support you've given him, and the council is presently working on how we're going to replace the good work that he did. So look forward to making some decisions about that. So those are our announcements. Our council met last night and discussed many good things that are going to be in the future of Salem Lutheran. And the text for Sunday from John 6, it's a rather long text, and it's not just the bread of life story. Remember last week we talked about Mark's story. When they got into the boat, they went out into the sea. And then there were these two stories that were missing in between, which was the feeding of the 5,000 and the storm. And John has all of those encapsulated in this text as well, and then goes on and on and on about the bread of life. But you'll notice that chronologically, Mark and John follow very close together. The feeding of the 5,000 is one of only 4 stories, I believe it is, that are common in all 4 Gospels. John the Baptist, the Passion story, of course, and the feeding of the 5,000, the healing of the blind man. And so it makes it significant to know that this is one of those stories that crosses all those Gospel lines. So John 6, after this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. You can look those up on your map. Sometimes I find it helpful where Jesus is at the time. He is in Galilee, so don't be mistaken to think he's by Jerusalem just yet. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs he was doing for the sick. And you'll remember that was going on last week in Mark, too, the last couple of weeks, where Jesus had been healing the sick and he had sent the disciples out as well. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with the disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for all of these people to eat?" I'm giving you a little hint. There's a verse in Numbers where Moses questions where they're going to get enough food to feed all of those in the wilderness. And I'm going to bring that up in the sermon on Sunday as well. But a little hint to take a look at that and see the parallels, because there are many parallels between Moses and Jesus, and especially in the feeding story with the manna and the nourishment that came down from heaven. Jesus becomes a Moses par excellence, the one who not only serves but supplies. He said this to test Philip, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to those who were seated, and so also the fish as much as they wanted. So, you hear those same similar words in the communion service, which are related to Paul's letters and to the distribution. So it sounds very similar, not exact, but there's enough inference to say that there's a little something going on back here about communion too. He distributed them to those who were seated, also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, gather up the fragments left over so that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. Let's get a little ahead of myself there. The 12 baskets are really important because you've got the 12 apostles and the 12 tribes. So there's a significance behind collecting enough for everybody. All the apostles, all the tribes. There's no doubt that connection of the number 12 is symbolic. And the other thing that's noticeable, that even after the scarcity that Philip, Simon, Andrew both realized, there was still an abundance after the fact that everybody was full and satisfied. And of course, this is a little hint as to where Jesus is going to be going with this as the chapter moves on. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." Now, John makes a distinction between the sign and a miracle. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we will hear about miracles. Now, John attaches a deeper significance. It's not only a miracle, but it's a sign. So there's a deeper symbolic significance to the spiritual life of those who follow Jesus. And we'll be discussing that as we move along. When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Something important here. It's not the idea that Jesus is rejecting kingship, but he's rejecting the kind of king that they want to make him, and it's also not on his timetable. It is not on God's timetable. And so he rejects the notion that this needs to happen first at this time, but then secondly, they want to make him the kind of king that he will refuse to be. Verse 16, when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the Sea of Capernaum. It was now dark. Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed out 3 or 4 miles, which is quite a significant amount in a boat, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, and coming near the boat, they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." That is one of the most quoted lines in the Bible. Do not be afraid. It's also something for us to realize. Sometimes we don't realize when Jesus comes into our midst, and we may be fearful. Sometimes Jesus comes, as Thomas Edison once said about work, so sometimes the door of opportunity knocks wearing overalls. I hope I said that right. But Edison would say that the door of opportunity is knocked, and sometimes people avoid it because it's dressed up in overalls. In other words, there's work involved. Sometimes when Jesus comes to us, we're challenged. We're asked to serve in ways that we never imagined before. The disciples, he says to them, "Do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. And then we'll move on from there. But it's an interesting plot here that we're developing. And so I invite you to join in the next few weeks as we talk about the bread of life and Jesus feeding and nourishing us, and the sign over and against the miracle of the event. And so this week, please send your comments to Michelle concerning times that you have served, some incidences that you remember about feeding ministry. So thanks for joining me. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Be still and know that the Lord is God.